The ancients thought it was a god sent from heaven and constructed their temple around it. Either way, the location presented the builders with a serious problem: how to construct what would be one of the wonders of the world in a swamp. They started by creating a dry base, treading down a layer of charcoal, then covering it with sheep fleece to prevent water rising up. Slate blocks were put on top. The floor of slate and marble was built 8 feet high to stay above the water level. It spanned an area 255 feet wide and 425 feet long. This sturdy platform supported a forest of columns. This one is 45 feet high, but Pliny reveals that the originals were a massive 60 feet, 6 stories tall. To achieve this ambitious engineering task, the architects used scaffolding. They assembled the columns from a series of stacked drums, each weighing more than 8 tons. A column consisted of around 30 drums, and once assembled, they were fluted with hammer and chisel. This was done an incredible 127 times. Amongst the ruins, Aaron Marshall finds evidence of how they built the temple roof.
So, having gotten the columns up, now you have the task of actually erecting the lintels. The lintels are all of those stone blocks which you have to put on top of the columns.
Again, it's Pliny who tells us how the lintels were positioned. It was crucial to get it precisely right.
What they did was they erected a ramp of reed bags all the way up to the level of the top of the columns. Then they placed the lintels on top of them and then poked a hole in the reed bag so all the sand came out. Slowly enough so that the lintels could be adjusted. You have to bear in mind, these aren't mortared. They have to be exact.
It took 120 years to complete the temple. We can now bring to life this incredible part of St. Paul's lost world, an astonishing building that was bigger than anything that had gone before. It was the focal point of huge activity, all centered around the cult of the goddess. An awning in the roof bathed her statue in light. And the cult of Artemis was by no means the city's only religion. The Romans believed in many gods, and they tolerated the traditional beliefs of the peoples they conquered. So at first, Paul and his new religion are well received. And a few miles from the temple in the city center, Paul discovered something that will allow him to deliver his message to an audience of unprecedented size.
We're entering one of the most spectacular buildings in Ephesus. 25,000 people came here for games and for protest. St. Paul entered here.
The city's theater, also built from white marble, was undergoing expansion while Paul was in the city. 459 feet across, containing 66 rows of seats, it was once the largest theater in the country.
Paul would have come here and addressed one of the biggest audiences of his life.
This was the perfect theater. It seated 25,000 people, and the acoustics allowed for a dramatic impact.
The superb acoustics derive from the design of the theater's seating.
These seats are wider, and the further up you go, they're narrower. And this concave shape helps to retain the sound in the theater.
But the theater wasn't designed simply for speeches and plays. The partition that shields the front row indicates that Paul shared his stage with more dangerous entertainment.
The wall is high to protect the spectators from the death and the blood and the guts of what went on here.
The recent discovery of a dedicated graveyard in Ephesus confirms that this theater was an arena where gladiators fought. These immensely popular contests drew large audiences. And as far as Paul was concerned, the gladiator games attracted even more people to hear his message. Because what separated St. Paul from Jesus' other disciples is that he doesn't just target Jews, he aims to convert people of all faiths. His methods would cause Christianity to become a worldwide religion. Ultimately, they would bring about the downfall of the Roman Empire. And yet it was the Romans' own engineering skill which gave St. Paul the opportunity he needed. St. Paul lived and preached in the city of Ephesus, part of modern-day Turkey, for 2.5 years. The largest city in Roman Asia, with an open-minded and cosmopolitan population, it was the ideal place to seek new converts. Archaeologist Julian Bennett discovered that the way the Romans built their towns gave Paul a unique chance to bring huge numbers of people to Christianity. But he also finds that this city had its eye fixed on more worldly pursuits than theology and a new religion.
Well, every Roman city would have had a brothel. This was an everyday fact of Roman life.
Paul is in a city with a reputation for pleasure-seeking.
A male-dominated society when a young man would not marry until he was in his mid-20s or 30s. A place like Ephesus, a harbour city, would have had several brothels.
Right in the center of town, early archaeologists found an intriguing signpost. It featured a foot and a heart.
This particular building, when they excavated it in the 19th century, they found a number of oil lamps here with scenes of erotic art on them, and also an inscription referring to young people. And so the excavators came to the natural conclusion this was the main brothel of Ephesus. It occupies such a prominent corner.
Prostitution was an important source of income for the Roman administration.
We even know that the prostitutes paid a tax to the city and to the government, and that this tax was the equivalent of one sexual act, and they had to pay this tax every month.
But it wasn't just about pleasure. The fundamental challenge for the town administrators was providing vital amenities for over 200,000 people. The most important was running water. The city's source was 8 miles away in the Marnus Valley. Diverting it into Ephesus required an extraordinary feat of engineering.
Well, here we have it. This is the aqueduct bridge for Roman Ephesus. This was built something like 2,000 years ago, before the time of St. Paul's visit here, but it's still in incredibly good condition.
An aqueduct this size needed funding beyond what the city could pay for, but it gave politicians a chance to gain favor with the masses.
It gives us the name of the man, Gaius Sextilius Pollio, with his wife and also their son, for the people of Ephesus. Sua pecunia facundum curavit. We pay for this from our own pocket. It is a way of making certain the people of Ephesus remember who you are. Or perhaps more to the point, when election time comes round again, remember my stepson.
Whatever their motive, the private individuals who paid for projects like this did a great service for the city. Pollio's aqueduct carried vital water supplies into Ephesus, where they entered an elaborate cistern.
This is precisely the sort of thing we're looking for when following an aqueduct. And they're absolutely jam-packed with calcium carbonate. It's calcium that's been dissolved out of the water, coming down with the aqueduct through these limestone hills, come into the city somewhere in this area, onto this structure. And over here, a section which has been broken loose. If I can lift this, and you have the flange at the one end, the socket at the other end. The flange would always be on the downstream side. So, a very good example of Roman technology.
Pipes like these ran in a network down the hill. There were 100 gallons a day for each Ephesian, comparable to the provision made in most modern cities. Paul and most other citizens got their water from communal fountains. But some buildings were supplied directly. One was the bathhouse. The Roman baths were the focal point of the city's social life. Here the Ephesians discussed politics, philosophy, and Paul's religious ideas. Christianity spread by word of mouth, and it was from places like this that Paul's message began to pass to a wider audience. The bathhouses were places equipped with what was then high technology, including an underfloor heating system called a hypocaust.
And we are, in fact, very lucky at this particular point. This is a very good preserved cross-section of a typical hypocaust system. So you can see the pillars here which support the main floor, a very thick, very hard pink Roman plaster known as opus signinum. It retains heat. On top of this, we're very lucky, marble slabs from the floor.
Hot air flooded the underfloor space, spreading up the walls to heat the room from all sides. Hot water was piped into the bath. The dirty water from the bathhouse was put to good use. It flushed out waste from other buildings. And just next door is one of the most important facilities found in any large Roman city.
And sure enough, a really nice Roman public latrine. Marble seats, nice and cool in the summer, not so nice perhaps in the winter. And you'd sit here next to your neighbour, talk about the weather, gladiatorial games, what life was like. You have a nice little water trough in front because the Romans did not have toilet paper. Instead, every Roman carried a personal sponge, and they would have the sponge on the end of a stick, dip it in the end of the water, and now you see what this is for.
Our evidence for this comes from an unusual source.
We are told that one gladiator, rather than go out and fight his opponent, decided to commit suicide. And he did so by making the excuse of going to the latrine and grabbing hold of a sponge and choking himself to death with this. So that's how we know about the sponges.
While Paul would have used these public restrooms, the upper classes had the privacy of their luxury homes. Today, the remains of these lavish houses are protected in a climate-controlled shelter. St. Paul would have seen them being built and furnished in exotic marble brought from across the Roman Empire to advertise their owner's wealth. Each house had a private bathroom, constantly flushed by the continuous flow of the aqueduct system.
This is a very high quality latrine, small private latrine. We know in Rome at least, we assume in Ephesus as well, they had different sized water pipes and they calculated the tax you paid by the size of your water pipe. So to have a private toilet like this is very much a sign of status.
The wealthiest households could even afford an early form of air conditioning, walls of water.
You needed water every day just to stay alive. You need water for washing, for cooking, but it helps to cool down the air as well. So all in all, this must have been an extremely pleasant place to be in, especially in the middle of the summer.
The Ephesian ruling classes enjoyed high quality of life, and suddenly Paul threatened to disrupt that. Not only did he undermine their pagan beliefs, but with it, he damaged the city's most important trade. Religion was big business in this Ephesus. Its market fed off pilgrims to the temple. Silver statuettes of the goddess Artemis sold as charms brought in vast revenue. But the arrival of Christianity meant that people were turning their backs on Ephesus. 25,000 people gathered in the great theater to hear a silversmith called Demetrius speak. He told them that Paul was not only insulting their goddess, but also threatening their main source of income. He stirred the crowd to the point where an anti-Christian riot erupted. Tradition has it that to appease the angry mob, Paul was thrown into prison. It's thought that was where he would write some of the letters that would make up so much of the New Testament. On his release, he was told to leave Ephesus. But his new religion had already taken hold. The city was becoming a city of Christians. And the silversmith Demetrius was right. The city of Ephesus declined with